Sydney. I don't know how to follow an activity like that. Wow, there are a lot more of you than Melbourne last week. All right, before I start, I want to give a quick mention to my colleague Aaron Dortona, who actually was meant to be up here with me today, but unfortunately can't be here. But he had just as much of a part to play in this, so hopefully I do it justice for him. All right, I'm here to talk about happiness, about how we, as an industry together, change the way that we look at retaining staff from the lessons of those that stay. Last year, our industry's average turnover was 3.5 times the national average. Nearly 17% of us moved agencies. Another 17% left the agency industry altogether. So take a moment to look to each side of you. It's likely that one of you has been with your agency for less than a year, one of you less than 3. The dominant narrative has been focused on the Great Resignation, and should we be surprised? After all, 50% of our industry is under 30 years old. Let that sink in. We are the generation that's been told to expect 18 jobs across 6 careers in our lifetime. But is all this moving really benefiting us? Does moving jobs this often actually make us happy? Well, for a time. But after the initial honeymoon year, our happiness hits a tenure trough, and I'm hoping that, cool, you guys have this too, because there's a lot of data in this one. Our happiness hits a tenure trough, and staff are more likely to become unhappy and more likely to move on. But critically, the longer people stay with their agency, the happier they are. Can I get a show of hands? How many people in this room have been with their agency for more than 5 years? Not very many. But congratulations, the data tells us that you are our happiest cohort. I don't know if it's a concern that people laugh at that. As you can probably see from the hands, this cohort actually makes up less than 1/5 of our staff. So we partnered up with Media to work through industry data, all those reams of surveys that everyone completes every 6 months. And there's all-important surveys that tell us as an industry what you want your leaders to hear. And if our happiest cohort is 5 years plus tenure, what can we learn from them? What motivates them? What makes them stay? This is the tenure equation to happiness. It's often assumed that the reasons people stay or leave are simply mirror opposites. But research tells us the psychology of staying is different to the psychology of leaving. For instance, you might not leave an agency because their values aren't totally aligned to you, but you certainly might stay for one. There have been dozens of turnover models studied over the years, looking at ease versus desirability of movement or job embeddedness, but for today, taking it back to basics. When looking at all the factors that might influence someone's decision to stay with a company, there are 2 broad buckets: motivating and hygiene. Motivating factors tend to increase job satisfaction. They are linked to achievement, self-direction, growth, and productivity. Hygiene factors, on the other hand, prevent dissatisfaction. These are things like salary or company policies. Research shows that they don't actually provide much long-term satisfaction. They just keep dissatisfaction at bay. To put this theory to the test, we wanted to understand what motivates you, and in particular, that elusive 5 years plus tenure, our happiest cohort. What is motivating? What is just hygiene? And what can we learn from them to drive a happier industry with less churn? We first took a look at what each tenure claims are their most important motivators. Compared to the industry average, 5 years plus place the most emphasis on responsibility, freedom, and recognition. These factors become increasingly important the longer an employee stays on, and the spread of what drives them starts to become clear. Unfortunately, for our 1 to 3 years, things aren't quite as simple. At this stage, everything is equally important all at once. And perhaps that lack of clarity isn't assisting happiness. So we dug further to see how these 2 tenure cohorts compared on claimed importance versus more pointed statements of actual satisfaction. First up, elephant in the room, remuneration. Hands up, who wants more money? I know I'll take it if it's going. And if you don't have your hand up, I think you're lying. Unsurprisingly, the most important claimed job factor. And across the board, the least satisfied. But this is the important bit, even when a responding employee is overall happy. So yes, we all want more money, no surprises, but it's merely hygiene. It's not what keeps us happy. What we did find surprising is that agency culture has also started to become somewhat of a commodity. Culture is now hygiene. The relationships we have with our peers is the second highest factor of claimed importance. And in most cases, it's well satisfied, whether staff were happy or unhappy, long-term employee or a new startup. So, as much as culture can do to boost morale or create strong team relationships, it's not that uniquely influential on long-term tenure. Whilst very enjoyable, the solutions that we've typically thrown at the retention crisis, such as lawn bowls drinks or an early weekend, aren't actually major differentiators in happiness. Instead, what our research has found is that the biggest determinants for you in happiness and job tenure are aligned to responsibility and freedom, recognition, and career progression. The biggest gaps that we found between people that were happy and unhappy were statements that pointed to these three things: being recognized for your effort, really getting the most out of your skill set, seeing the opportunity for growth, personally motivating factors. Happy people have proportionally way higher agreements with these statements, and they are our biggest opportunity to shift the dial towards happiness. When we compare 1 to 3 years versus 5+ years, we see longer tenure correlate to stronger satisfaction with these factors. Staff in this cohort are being used to the best of their ability, they're being recognised more, and they're also happier with their financial reward. The only real tipping point is that they're running out of room to grow within their own agency, making them even more valuable to the industry. It's not to say that hygiene factors can't motivate, but with the lessons learned from this data, there are so many other longer-term levers that we can pull to generate sustained satisfaction, motivation, and retention. So that's the data as you've told it to us and as you want your leaders to hear. So with this in mind, we'll leave those leaders with a challenge. How will you ensure that you know not only what your staff are good at, but what they're passionate about, and how can you bring out the best in them? Will you support and celebrate those staff and recognise their talents? And will you be open and honest enough with them to provide clear paths to growth? We all love working in a fun environment, and earning money will never get old, but they won't change the churn. Leading and supporting with an empathetic and personal approach will yield not only longer standing tenures, but ultimately a happier industry. Thank you.